So sometimes when you're getting ready to do your addition, you'll just have one small little error area. So one spot that doesn't quite do what it's supposed to. And so sometimes you can do what we call curating this. So if you look at this etching plate print, it's got a lot of like smudges and problem areas and things like that on here. Just a tiny little bit of a gouache that came over the edge on the plate. So I always tell people sometimes you can save these. We call this curating your prints. And so the best thing to start with is you want to start with the most gentle method of removing stuff off the paper, and then get to the more abrasive stuff later. But since paper is basically just usually cotton fibers all built up on top of each other, it's actually quite easy to just remove the top layer of those cotton fibers and clean up your print in such a way that it looks fine. So you can kind of just abrade off that top level, that top layer of your the cotton fibers. And you can kind of, sometimes a kneadable eraser will actually take a lot of problems out of there. But in this case, I just have this one spot here that's got, I don't know if you can kind of see it, but it's got a little blue tint to it. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to take a really sharp razor blade. I'm just going to really carefully abrade away. And I'm just real sort of gently trying to take that top layer of cotton off of there. I'll kind of smooth it out. And then, I always hit it again with the kneadable eraser to kind of like buff down the copper fibers that are now kind of like standing straight up instead of laying flat. And then I take my, the burnisher, and I'll lay it over the top of that spot that we just did. And I'll just try to like flatten this out and try to burnish that down so that the spot that we just kind of scraped off of there is now flat. So you can kind of burnish that down, and eventually you can get it to the point where it looks pretty good and no one will even know there was an issue there. If you have little tiny areas of starved line, one of the things that you can do is you can get a really sharp tool. It's when the paper is wet, so when the print just comes off the press. You can just go in with a sharp tool, your etching needle, something like that, and just draw a tiny little bit of ink from one part of the line and then just put it over the top of that starved line, and sometimes that can really help solve a starved line issue in etching. The last thing you can do if you really are desperate is you could try to clean up your a bigger problem area. So this area here is acrylic. If I use a kneadable eraser on this blue area that's at the top of my print up here, that's outside the boundary, I'm going to have a really hard time getting that off of there. It's acrylic ink, so it's down in there pretty deep. So I'm going to go ahead and try to scrape this thing off, but I've got a feeling that it's going to be really hard to get that acrylic ink out of there. This is probably a lot of it soaked down into that. And you know, one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to just gouge a hole in your paper, because that looks worse probably than having ink in the wrong spot. So that just leaves a big torn up area that's right there. You probably want to go in and really try to work on that more smoothly. But sometimes you can scrape enough ink off of there to kind of get it to the point where it looks decent, and then you can just burnish down that particular spot and get rid of some of the torn up areas of the paper, and it looks a little bit better. But you got to kind of know when to stop trying to curate a print and just kind of give up on it and just go with a smaller edition instead of what you would hope for. This is also why you want to have lots of extra pieces of paper when you print, so that you have, you just don't ever know how much you're going to yield out of your edition. So if you want to have an edition of 10, you've got to make sure you start with at least 20 pieces of paper if you're going to do 3 layers, just to make sure that you have enough space in there to account for problems. So whenever you do sign and number your prints, you always want to put the title in the middle, your signature over here on the right, and then you want to put the title here. And some people would prefer to sign on the back, so you can actually do that, or you can put your signature and stuff on the back of your print, so it's not distracting up front. But you always sign in pencil, never in pen. Always has to be done in pencil. So that's the basics of curating and signing and numbering prints.